All right, well, let's get started. Can you let me know if you can hear me okay, Kpis? Hey, Adam, nice to see you. Thanks for coming today. You can let me know if you can hear me. All right, thanks very much. All right, so today we're talking about cracking the cold calling code, which is MSP business owner cold calling strategies. If you have never made a cold call before, this will be really interesting for you. If you're currently making cold calls and you're not getting the results that you want, I think you'll have some great takeaways from this presentation as well. And if you're just thinking about how you can, at any stage of the development of your business, add cold calling in as an owner to improve your sales results, you're also going to find a lot of value from this presentation today. So today we're going to meet the presenter. We're going to talk about where you are currently in your journey, where you'd like to be, and then we're going to talk about the CEO cheat codes that'll be helpful to you moving forward in that journey. And then, as I said, we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. So my name is Carrie Simpson. If we haven't met, hopefully I'll see you at an event this year. Fingers crossed, the world will open up again. I'm fully vaccinated now. And I'm excited to be heading to the HTG or IT Nation Evolve Q2 event in Dallas next week. If anybody is here from Dallas, then I would be delighted to connect with you. So just say hello. I've got over 20 years of cold calling experience. I've got 2 children, one of whom is now a cold caller. I live in Michigan most of the time, and Mexico when the weather gets untenable in Michigan. I founded Managed Sales Pros in 2014, and I founded, built, and exited from a US-based call center called Everywhere Managed in under 5 years. And at that time, we had $2 million in annual recurring revenue. We put about 30 points to the bottom line, and my digital spend throughout the entire ownership of that business was $0. So we invested heavily in cold calling because, you know, it's hard to justify selling cold calling if you're generating all your business using digital. So we were able to grow a $2 million business and sell that business in under 5 years. And the only methodology we used at that time was cold calling. I doubt any of you have even heard of Everywhere Managed. It wasn't a client-facing brand. It worked with, it did fulfillment for Managed Sales Pros and other US-based businesses. So where are you at on your cold calling journey today? And in my opinion, there are 3 phases when you are developing your sales and marketing process. And phase 1 is consistent. So if you're not doing anything right now, or if you just kind of sporadically pick up the phone once in a while when you feel like it, or you send a couple of emails, or maybe send some notes on LinkedIn, but you're not doing it in any real structured way with any measurable results to talk about, then you haven't quite yet hit consistent. So to reach consistent sales and marketing levels, you choose one thing. So if you haven't read Atomic Habits by James Clear, I would highly recommend picking up that book before continuing. It talks about 1% improvement, and it's a very realistic way to improve pretty much any part of your life. So for example, I want to start cleaning my house more often. I start with making my bed. I don't make a commitment to myself that I'm going to clean my entire house every day, because that's just not realistic. The same thing is true in your business. You're not going to go from 0 to 8 hours of something every day, and you probably don't even have time for that. So be realistic in your approach to sales and marketing. If you're focusing on being consistent, you want to choose one thing, do that one thing every day, track those activities, and then track those results. Once you get to the point where you've got that managed and it seems simple to you and you understand what you're doing and what you want to add more of, then you move on to phase 2. And I would describe phase 2 as professional, right? You're learning best practices. You're learning the KPIs that you need to know. You're A/B testing, which means you're using different language on this call and that call to see which one performs better. And then maybe you're trying something like email, call, email, or call, email, call, right? You want to identify which ways perform best for you. right? And you can kind of pick and choose things from what other businesses are doing, but in my experience, every business is a little bit different. Every business owner is a little bit different. So what works well for me may not work well for you all the time. I mean, the nuts and bolts and basics of sales and marketing are pretty much the same no matter what the industry, right? Business to business marketing, business to business sales, business to business prospecting, whether you're selling accounting, managed services, or cold calling, the processes and programs and cadences that you will use don't vary wildly from industry to industry, but the ways that you approach them might. You're going to identify relevant patterns. And once you can figure out patterns, you can figure out how to improve things. So you're always looking for anomalies. So when we're managing enormous amounts of data and, running a team of 50 cold callers who are all calling for 40 different clients at any given time, there's a lot of data to go through every day. So what I'm looking for when I look at data is always anomalies, right? If there's 20 of this every day and then one day there's only 5, that's an anomaly and it needs to be explored. And the same goes the other way. If people are if you're getting 5 of something every day and then one day you get 20, let's not assume that's going to happen again. We really need to understand why that happened. What did we do differently? And if it's good, how do we replicate it? And if it's bad, how do we get rid of it? And then we're going to talk about automating things. So today we're focusing on consistency, but I want you thinking with an eye towards where you're going to go next. Phase 3 is predictable, and that means that the sales and marketing initiatives that you've put into place are actively generating opportunities for you in a way that allow you to make decisions that are data-driven. You're relying on facts instead of feelings, and you're setting realistic and attainable goals for yourself or possibly for your sales team at this time. You're realizing revenue from the strategies that you've chosen. So not only have you done something, that something is producing a return on your investment, and you want to increase that return on investment by either doing more of that or adding something to it that's going to increase the success of it. So once you've got all those things managed, then you add another thing. So trying to do everything at once, like we're not going to become experts at cold calling and email and digital and trade. Like we're not going to become experts on everything at the same time. Pick the one thing that you want to focus on. Start with a little bit and then do a lot more of that, which seems like common sense, but I know myself, I'm super aggressive, I'm super ambitious, I want to do it all right now, and I don't like process. I don't like doing mundane things over and over and over again. I've never been good at that. So I've always had to surround myself with a support network of people who could handle process better than I can. So in EOS terms, if any of you are EOS managed businesses, I'm a visionary and I need an integrator in my world to accomplish pretty much anything. But for the first 3 years that I ran Managed Sales Pros, I didn't have an integrator. I just had myself. So I had to figure this all out on my own. So I have gone through this journey as well. At one point, I was just one person sitting at a kitchen table, making cold calls, trying to get people to buy more cold calls. The first thing you need to do is schedule time for it. Right? If you don't put this on your calendar, you're never going to do it, especially if you don't enjoy it very much. So you need to put it on your calendar and respect it the same way you would a client or prospect meeting, right? Choose 2-hour time blocks during business hours. And if you don't have 2 hours, choose 1. But make sure you put it on your calendar and honor it. Make a daily sales agenda. Once you start looking at how much you can get done in an hour, it's not very much. Right, so you sit down at your desk, then that takes a couple of minutes, and you boot up your laptop, that takes a little time, then you go log into your CRM or your PSA, or you find your Excel spreadsheet, and that takes another 5 minutes, and before you know it, you're 20 minutes into the hour that you've scheduled to do your outbound calling that day, and you've only got 40 minutes of that time left. You can make somewhere between 10 and 12 dials if you're using a click-to-dial integration in a 1-hour period, but you're probably going to make closer to 8. And it can take up to 300 to get a sales appointment. So if you waste any of those dials, the odds on you achieving things in that 1-hour block of time are very, very limited. So your mileage may vary here. There's a bunch of different types of people on this call at a bunch of different phases in their business development. If you are a brand new MSP business owner and you have lots of time and no clients, well, you can put 6 hours on your calendar if you want. But if you've got lots of clients and no time, you're going to have to find a way to offload some of the things you're doing right now so that you can create the space and time for you to be able to do this effectively. You don't want to sit down at your desk and realize 2 hours later that you've accomplished absolutely nothing. So if you hate outbound calling, do it first thing in the morning. The first thing you do when you get into the office, you get your calls out of the way for the day. And that way you don't have to worry about it for the rest of the day. You don't have to loathe the idea of making the calls at 3 p.m. And you can do it when you're higher energy. So for me, most of my energy comes in the morning. I want to do things that require energy in the morning. In the afternoon, I can do things like accounting or things that I find uninteresting. I think I'm very fortunate in that I've always found cold calling interesting. I like talking to talented people about interesting problems. So I've always found a way to connect with the people that I'm talking to just by being inherently curious about what it is they're doing to solve problems in their company. And then when I became a business owner, that was even more exciting to me. So as a sales rep, I really wanted to own my own business. So every time I was calling on a CEO, I was just filled with curiosity about what they were doing and how they did it. So very important, don't lie to yourself, right? It's really easy to work without working. So you can tell me that you called for an hour yesterday, but don't lie to yourself about it. It's never going to be perfect. So don't make plans to start cold calling after you set up your CRM perfectly or after you buy a CRM. Start right now, exactly where you are, using the things that you already have. You don't need anything special. Excel works fine. A piece of paper and a pen will work fine. You're only making an hour of calls a day. You don't need an elaborate system to do this with. Once you get good at it, then you consider whether or not you want to make an investment in processes, coaching, and software. How many of you guys got a Peloton during quarantine? Right? Like, how many of you are now hanging towels on that Peloton? Right? So you went from, I never ride a bike, I don't exercise daily, I don't do any of those things, but I'm going to buy a $2,500 exercise bike because I'm seeing other people do it. And I'm going to use it 3 times and then I'm going to abandon it. So my suggestion is always, once you've realized that you're going to stay committed to doing this, then start making investments in it. But if it's something that you find objectionable or disinteresting and you're not going to keep doing it, is disinteresting a word? I don't even know. After you get used to it and you decide that you're going to commit to it, then make larger investments in systems and processes. Measuring your results is really important. So one of the reasons that you want to track what you're doing all the time is that if you don't know what you did yesterday, you can't make it better today. So how will you know if outbound's working for you if you're not tracking the number of calls that it takes in order for you to get an appointment and then the number of appointments that you're able to convert? Right? How are you going to define success? Do you know how many appointments that you need to schedule this year in order to achieve your financial goals for the year? Do you know what your 5-year plan looks like? And can you work backwards from that? So how will you know if this is something that you want to continue doing? Think about how you're defining success for yourself in this. So it might at the beginning just be, I'm going to make 20 phone calls today. And I'm going to define success by completing 20 phone calls. I'm not going to worry about what happened on the calls. I'm not going to worry about trying to improve them. I'm just going to worry about making them every day. If you're doing the same thing with email, so if you decide that cold calling isn't where you want to start your sales and marketing journey, you want to use a different methodology. How do you know if your emails are effective? How are you able to track that? Who are they completing the calls to action that you're putting in the email? If you've never measured your sales results before and you've kind of worked on muscle and feel and you built your business through word of mouth and referrals, there may not be a defined process in your business yet to understand whether or not something is working. So as you're tracking and measuring, you're going to start creating the processes that you're going to use at scale. So it's a whole lot easier to change something when it's just you doing it rather than when you've got a team of 5 people doing it. So trying to manage a 5-person sales team is extraordinarily challenging, especially if they've just been able to do whatever they want all willy-nilly. So if you're developing a sales process that you can follow, you can then educate other people on that sales process. And you want to know what the best practices are. So you go through everything yourself, you track it, you measure it. Don't hold your team accountable to the same results that you're going to get, simply because as the business leader and the person who benefits the most when you close sales, you're always going to be better at it, more invested in it, and have more opportunities than your sales reps will. And they're also they're motivated by money, but they're never going to make the kind of money that you will as the business owner. So they're never going to be as engaged. So accept that your sales reps will always be able to do about 80% tops of what you're able to do. And then if you're focused on other areas like networking, please let there be networking again soon. You want to figure out which things you should be spending money on. So whatever it is that you pick, start tracking everything that happens and every interaction that you have with a prospect so that you know whether or not you should be doubling down on that or trying something new. So documentation, you would never let your service desk get away with not documenting what they were doing on tickets. I want you to think about your sales process the way that you think about your service desk. You want to be able to improve things. You want to be able to replicate what's working, and you have to be able to scale it. Otherwise, it's going to be your job forever. And I don't know about you, but I didn't start my business to manage a whole team of telemarketers for 8 hours a day, every day. I started my business because I wanted financial freedom and the flexibility to do what I wanted when I wanted. Imagine my surprise when it turned out that I had 50 bosses instead of just the one that I had when I was a telemarketer. So as you get better at the things that you're doing, if you haven't documented them so that you can plan for succession or plan for removing yourself from the process, again, it's way easier to do this when it's just you and documenting one person's data and one person's results. So really approach this scientifically. What are you going to do? And then how are you going to share that knowledge with someone else afterwards? You're planning for the future here. So you're not just cold calling, you're cold calling with an eye towards wanting someone else to be successful at it. So once you've figured it out and once you've cracked the code for what works for you, your next goal is going to be bringing somebody in to take over that job. Right? I don't know what your billable time is worth, but I know what I bill my consulting out at. And I bill out at $5,000 a day right now. So am I the best person to be making cold calls for my business? Well, maybe not, but I'm also not consulting all day, every day. So you kind of have to balance where you can generate revenue with the things that you are passionate about. So for me, cold calling kind of resets me. I like to cold call. I'll cold call for my clients once in a while. I make our own calls. So if you don't find passion or joy in calling, the next step is going to be bringing someone else in to handle that. But let's get on to what we came here to learn about. Now that I'm done lecturing you on process and procedure and how to make it better once you figured it out, the first thing that you should think about when you're peer-to-peer prospecting is how you're introducing yourself. The odds on you reaching another business owner when you dial into a company, first time, first try, very, very slim unless that person has given you their business card with their direct dial. So odds are you're going to speak to a gatekeeper first. So your introduction needs to have some impact. And this is where being a business owner really benefits you over us being a sales rep, right? You're going to go into that conversation and speak as if you're giving a keynote, right? You're going in confident and aggressive. But you want to remember that you don't know who's picking up the phone. So you're never going to talk down to someone, but you are going to speak strongly, right? You're going to be brief. The same way that you would send a quick email, you're going to have a quick conversation with whoever picks up the phone. And remember that you don't need to fill up the space with noise, right? When you ask a question or make a statement, you ask a question or make a statement, and then you wait for the other person to respond. You're not asking for permission, and you're not helping them come to any sorts of conclusions. You're just making a statement. So when I'm calling for my own business, I'm always going to say, hi, it's Carrie Simpson calling. I'm the owner of Managed Sales Pros, and I'm calling to speak to Adam Kerrigan. And then I just wait. And I let them decide what they're going to do next. More often than not, I get put through because I've mentioned my name, and I've mentioned my company name, and I've mentioned the name of the person that I want to chat with. If you don't have a name, you can approach this differently and say, it's Carrie Simpson calling. I'm the owner of Managed Sales Pros. I'm calling to speak to somebody about business development. Who do you recommend I talk to? And again, I'm going to just pause and wait for them to answer. And if it takes them 20 minutes to answer, I'm going to sit in silence for 20 minutes until they do answer. Don't be tempted to give them suggestions or recommendations at any point in the conversation. Just wait. They're going to answer you or they're going to hang up the phone. So if they hang up the phone, you just call them back. You call them back in 90 days. And when they answer you, they're either going to answer with a, we're okay with what we have, we don't take sales calls, any of those things, or they're going to put you through to the person. So we're not really talking about objection handling today, but if you're speaking to a gatekeeper, remember brevity, right? They could have 4 or 5 different phones going off in the background. You just want to get through this conversation to get on to the one that you want to have with the owner of the business. So that's a very basic approach to outbound peer-to-peer calling, just being aggressive, direct, and acting like the business owner. The things we're going to talk about next are the things that I've been using for a little while to get into opportunities that might have ordinarily been a little more challenging. So I call this one the Go-Giver approach. And if you haven't read the Go-Giver, I would do that. The goal here is to really just be everybody's best friend, right? You know everyone, you know everything, and you are more than happy to share your wealth of information and your enormous network with the people around you. So the best way to approach this process is to end every call you have, every conversation you have with anybody external to your business with one intentional question. So write this one down. What would be most helpful for your business right now? So if you've been cold calling and people give you the objection like, you know what, we're happy with what we have, or you know what, we've signed a contract and we're in that agreement for another 3 years, we're not going anywhere for a bit. Great, I understand. You know, at that point, right, you're not going to try to insert yourself into a company where they've got a contractual obligation for the next 3 years. If they're going to break their contract with that company, they'll absolutely break their contract with yours. So you're kind of banging your head against the wall trying to insert yourself in a long-term arrangement like that. But this question is very non-invasive, and actually it makes you look like a great person, right? What would be most great? You're not interested in IT support right now. I understand. We'd love to be considered in the future. How would we go about throwing our hat in the ring? And then they'll tell you what that you need to do, and you should follow that process. But after that, you ask them this. The goal is to get them to tell you what they're struggling with, right? So maybe they are trying to hire somebody in HR right now, or they're struggling with accounting, right? There's 100 things that could be going wrong in any business at any given time. Now think about your own business. What do you need help with right now? What would be most helpful to you right now? If you got anybody knows anybody that wants to make cold calls for a living, that would be super helpful to me right now. But asking this question keeps the conversation going, allows you to build rapport with that person. And then once they give you an understanding of what it is that you're looking for, you're going to move on to the next stage in this process. You're going to find a way to help them. But while you're finding a way to help this prospect, you're going to find a handful more. So the next thing to do is, if I say that I need to hire an HR director, maybe you want to start calling some recruiters, right? So now you know that I'm looking for somebody. You know that I'm willing to pay to solve that problem. Now you make a list of any recruiter that you're even peripherally connected to on LinkedIn. You're going to call and talk to the owner of that firm, right? And to get through to the owner of that firm, you're going to present the opportunity just like this. Your gatekeeper picks up the phone. You're going to say, hey, Joe, it's Carrie Simpson calling. I'm the owner of Managed Sales Pros. I'm calling to speak to your CEO. I have a referral for them. And then just wait. If they'd like to send you to the sales department, say, I'm the owner of Managed Sales Pros or your company. I'd like to speak to your CEO, please. Right? There's very few people in the world that aren't going to put you through to that person after that point, or they'll send the message to that person and that person will return the call. This is going to work better at the 20 to 50 seat space than it will in the larger co-managed space. So if you're looking at opportunities between 20 and 50 users, this is still a great way to get the CEO on the phone, because if they are also an owner-led sales organization, they may not even have a sales team developed at this time. So once you get the CEO on the phone, you can then present that opportunity to them. So coming into a conversation, let's go back here. Going into the conversation, giving someone something, instead of asking for something, already positions you differently from the other vendors that they're speaking to. So after the conversation, you can say, great, I hope that works out for you. You know, if there's anyone in your network that could use great IT support, we work with professional services firms, very much like yours, who have a minimum of whatever your qualifier is, so who have a minimum of 20 computers. And then they may say something about that, and then you're going to ask them, how are you currently receiving IT support? And now you're going to go through the same sales pitch that you would go through if you were calling in cold, but the person on the other phone has been handed a hot lead, and the odds on them disengaging at this point in the process are very slim. You know, it would be very rude. So you have the opportunity now for unfettered access to somebody that you'd like to present your services to. You can do this with 10 recruiting firms. Okay? You don't have to do it with just one. You can call 10 of them. So now you've got one lead that you can present to as many companies as you want, and then those companies will take it from there. So they're going to call the company that wasn't interested in working with you anyway. You're going to come off as a hero to both organizations. So you're going to have the opportunity not only to bid on this person's business, but also the person who you're trying to assist to begin with. If you can do this over and over and over again, you're going to start achieving quite a bit of success from it. And you can also start building a referral network. So not only are you going to ask for their business, but you're going to talk to them a little bit more about what great opportunities look like for them. Tell them a little more about what great opportunities look like for you. Maybe you can co-host a webinar with them. Maybe there are 100 different opportunities for you to exchange business. The more you do this, the less you'll have to make cold calls. So if people start bringing opportunities to you, at that point, you're building a predictable referral engine. So you're not relying on word of mouth or passive referrals. You're actively creating a referral engine through engaging with the market. You get to be everybody's buddy and everybody's hero here. The other process that I really like is a process that I call You're Really Special. So then first thing you're going to do is schedule your next webinar or event. Now, if you can piggyback that on the conversations that you've been having already, so if you're talking to somebody who targets the same group as you, offer to co-host a webinar with them. You bring your leads to the table and they bring their leads to the table. You register all of them, or you invite all of them using a webinar platform or using email. And then at that point, you're going to follow up with the people that register for the webinar. But your first goal will be to choose a relevant topic. So we do a lot of events for our clients right now around cybersecurity, and we try and be very specific about the vertical. So cybersecurity for Michigan business owners, cybersecurity for lawyers in Michigan, cybersecurity for doctors, whatever. You want to be as specific as possible to target the groups that you want to attend. I also like to talk about a specific business challenge. So I'm not a big fan of 5 reasons to move your business to the cloud, because if you Google 5 reasons to move your business to the cloud, you're going to see 1,000 webinars. So think about a specific business challenge that the cloud would solve. So for me personally, I really like the idea of talking to customers right now about the way you can use Teams for interviewing, hiring, recruiting, and training, right? So it's a pretty interesting opportunity. It's relevant to everyone, especially post-pandemic, while we're all still trying to figure out how to create culture using remote communication tools. Right? If you can create something that is relevant for a company that's adding headcount, a company that's growing is a prospect you want, right? If they're still adding headcount through the pandemic, they're probably going to continue that trajectory. So as they grow, you grow. It's a great way to interact with potential prospects. You want to schedule this webinar about 3 weeks away. You want to give yourself enough time to get the event planned, get it scheduled, get all the content created, and you want to give yourself enough time to invite people, but not so much time that nobody attends. So the further out the engagement, the less likely it is people are going to come to the engagement. But what we don't really tell you is that the webinar doesn't matter, right? Like whether you come to the webinar or not, I don't care. I just want you to register for it. So the webinar is a red herring. Our webinar today, we had 600 people register for it. 600 people did not come to the webinar today. But I have 600 email addresses of people who indicated that they were interested in cold calling. And that's a pretty nice list to go through. So now you're going to invite all of these prospects. And if you're partnering with other people to do it, which is even better, you're going to invite all of their prospects. And people are going to start registering. And that's when this process really kicks off. Right? So step 2, we're going to pre-qualify them. So you're going to have user-defined fields set up in your platform where you can ask them in advance of the webinar, what do they want to hear about? How many computers do they have? How do they receive their IT support? Whatever it is you want to know about a prospect before you decide if you want to spend time chasing them, you can put that right into the webinar and require them to enter the information when they register or they can't register. Right? So that can be both beneficial and detrimental. Right? We had a one-click process for this webinar, so I didn't ask anybody any questions. But normally I would add a question like, are you planning on outsourcing your sales development in the next 12 months? Are you planning on hiring a sales rep in the next 12 months? Are you considering building a cold calling program? And then whatever you want to ask them, you put it right in there and you make them answer the question. If they're not interested enough to answer a question, they're obviously not interested enough to engage and talk about your services. So it eliminates anybody who's really just tire kicking or anybody who's going to register and not be bothered to engage afterwards. No, if they'll answer those questions, they're qualified and you got to get on that right away. So once you have all of that done, that list is going to come right to your inbox, and you can set up notifications so that every time someone registers, you get a little ping letting you know that they registered. Oops. And then you're going to proactively go after those registrations. So, hey, Joe, thank you so much for registering for my webinar, right? It's your webinar. You're presenting on it. You're the business leader. You are the authority. You're the trusted expert. And how nice that you're calling them to thank them for agreeing to attend something that you're hosting. But I noticed when I was reviewing the registrations for our event next Thursday that you have 30 computers there. And I think most of our attendees are going to have fewer than that. And I'd really hate for you to not find that content relevant. I'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one at a time that's convenient for you to answer any questions that you have about cybersecurity for, ABC accounting. I have an hour next Tuesday at 1 or next Wednesday at 10. Which of those would work best for you? And again, then you're just going to be quiet and let them answer. So we're doing this right now. My partner owns an MSP. I do this for him regularly. And if 13 people register for a webinar, I can get 6 of those people to meet one-on-one with the CEO of the business. Your number should be significantly higher because you are the CEO of the business. And hell, if they can talk to you right now, why don't you have the conversation with them right now and see if you can get them all the way through the sales process? So if you have the time and they have the time, there's no reason why you can't have a conversation about their challenges right now. But normally you're going to want more than the time that may be available to somebody that you cold called essentially during the day. You can set up that meeting and now you have a sales meeting. Now, whether they come to the webinar or not, you now have a one-on-one 60-minute appointment to talk about something that's keeping them up at night, right? They're attending the webinar for a reason. So if you can find out what they wanted to learn, now you know what their pain point is. They came to learn something. What was that something? Hone in on that and then hammer away at it until they recognize that they could be receiving significantly better support from your business. The whole point of outbound prospecting isn't to find companies who've never seen value in IT support before. You're not looking for the companies that are so disinterested with their computer networks that they haven't updated anything and they pay the kid that lives across the street with a case of beer and $50 when something breaks. Right? That isn't a prospect. You're looking for people who have already signed managed services agreements with people that you consider, equal to or better than your business. And those are the companies that you want. You know that they pay their bills. You know that they see value in managed IT services because they're already buying managed IT services elsewhere. It's your job to convince them that they would be best served talking to a company where the CEO is so interested in doing business with them that they picked their name out of a webinar and they called them directly. Now, I'm flattered when the CEO of a business that I'm considering doing business with connects with me personally. I don't know about you, but that impresses me. Rather than talking to their sales rep, if the CEO calls me, I'm far more inclined to do business with that firm, right? I don't feel like I'm just one of many. Now I feel important. And people like to do business with people that they like and trust. And ideally at this point, I admire and respect a little bit. You're an expert at this. You've got a lot of knowledge. Instead of having to go to an hour-long webinar and then schedule a call, now I get to skip right over the tedium of the webinar and get my questions answered. Right? My questions maybe aren't the same as that person's. And now I've got one-on-one time with you, and you're going to answer all my questions. And you know what? Let's just get a proposal on the table. So I really like that approach. And it's working well over here. I want to say that I scheduled over 100 seats of opportunity in about 5 hours last week using that approach. The next thing I want to talk to you about is something I call one call and many leads. So you want to fish where the fish are. So start looking up places in your community, professional associations, certifying bodies, executive peer groups, chambers of commerce, anywhere where a lot of your buyers are going to congregate and interact with each other. Or if there are people who are holding the keys to those groups of people. So if you think way back to like 5 or 6 slides ago when we started talking about interacting with people and potentially co-hosting webinars with them, here you're going to reach out to the people that are coordinating or organizing these different associations or governing bodies, and you're going to become their best friend. You're going to offer them thought leadership. So content marketing, extraordinarily important right now. So what I would do is call them and say, I noticed on your website that you're hosting regular educational events for your members. I'm the owner of Managed Sales Pros, and I specialize in blah. So in your case, you're the owner of ABC IT, and you specialize in teaching lawyers about their cybersecurity risks. I'd like to offer the members of your association a learning session on cybersecurity. Who should I speak to in order to get that scheduled? All right, so you're going to have to do a little bit of work here. No matter which of these strategies you choose, there's always going to be a little bit of work to do. And it's important to remember that you want to do as much work as possible outside of that calling block. So you're going to have that calling block on your calendar, and you're not going to spend your calling block time researching lists of associations. Your calling block is for calling. So anything that you can do off time, I would encourage you to do, right? You've already got an 8-hour day. Are you really going to be able to free up 2 hours to do a whole bunch of research? Probably not. I will get my kids to do stuff like this, right? I've got a 21-year-old daughter. She works 10 hours a week for a managed service provider in Canada. And when she's not working for them, I have her doing stuff for my business. So she can go make a list of associations for me. I don't have to do that myself. So you got some kids, get them on the internet and get them doing some research. Find a list of associations, networking groups. If you're not doing BNI or anything like that, that's also something to explore. There's lots of great ways to connect with people. I know we're all exhausted from so many Zoom meetings so often over the course of the last year. But if they're still having Zoom happy hours in your market, you should be going to them. You should be everywhere, right? You're everybody's best friend. You're a go-giver. You're an expert. You're a thought leader. And the more times people see you, the more times you're going to be like, oh, hey, nice to see you. You know what? That HR recruiter that you recommended, she was fantastic. Thank you so much. Right? Great. Who else do you need to meet? Right? That anytime somebody asks you to help them connect with another person, that's an opportunity for 10 more deals for you. So once you get to the person that you need to get to, you're going to create an event and repeat the same strategies that you had for your previous, I forgot the word. So for the strategies we talked about previously, you're going to go over that and over that and over that. So these 3 things all combined, if you can remember to coordinate them effectively, will create a whole lot of opportunity for you as the business owner to connect with other people in the market and have them start funneling more opportunity to you. So some of the things that you're going to want to think about as you do this is, 1, a content agreement. So you can offer content to an association, but do you care about what they do with it afterwards? Are they going to post it on their website, or will you post it on your website, or do you both get to post it afterwards? So you'll want to think about what happens to that content. Are they allowed to edit it for content or time? Right? Do you want them editing bits and pieces out of it? And do you have the time to review it before they take it live again? So when you're negotiating, providing even a free webinar to an organization, you want to understand what they're going to do with it next. And ideally, you want to make sure that you get to retain a copy of it, because you can do all kinds of stuff with that content afterwards. Chop it up into little 2-minute segments and put it into your newsletters. Chop it up and host it on your website. You can send it over to an editor and have them pull out like a minute here and a minute there. And now you've got things to put on LinkedIn until the dawn of time. So don't just stop there, right? Once you've got that webinar done, you can take that webinar and do all kinds of stuff with it. But remember, you don't care if anybody comes to it. You want them to register for it. If they attend, great. If they don't attend, that's fine too. The ones that you don't connect with before the webinar, you can continue to reach out to after the webinar. So the more chances for interaction you have, the better. I recommend hosting it if at all possible, so that you get to maintain control of the attendee list. You can share that attendee list with the other people that are co-hosting or co-sponsoring with you. But wherever possible, you want to manage the lists of people that the emails go to and the lists of people that are responding to them. I'm able to manage all of my interactions with people who are coming to webinars through the webinar platform that I use. And one of the things I like most about that is it shows me a lot of intent data. So for example, Carolyn is on the webinar today, and I can go and see how many times Carolyn went and reviewed the webinar. So if she found the content really interesting and she focused on the webinar portion more than she focused on the initial cold calling to get through the gatekeepers part of the webinar, I know that if I want to call her and talk to her about selling my services afterwards, I'm going to skip over the parts that she didn't watch over and over again. I'm going to go right to the part that she found most interesting, and I'm going to talk to her about our managed webinar solutions. That's going to make most sense, because that's the thing that she's interested in. So as you're able to fine tune your processes and add things into them, like I didn't know that you could pull intent data out of the back of a webinar platform when we started doing webinars 5 years ago. Obviously I've learned more about them since then. So now I can be more intentional about my approach to managing webinars for myself or for my clients. So how can Managed Sales Pros help? If you don't want to do your own cold calling, we can do it for you. We can help you create the processes and playbooks that you need to be successful. We can train you or your team how to do it. And we're always delighted to have those conversations. So if you are on the webinar today and you're thinking, yeah, that sounds good, Carrie, but I don't really want to do any of that. I don't have time for any of that. We'd be more than happy to provide you with a quote for our services. And you can reach us at hello@managedsalespros.com. So I have a little bit of time for Q&A now. If anybody has questions that they would like answered, I'd be happy to answer them now. You should be able to enter them into the Q&A panel. Thank you. So the Q&A panel is already running. So in the handout section of the webinar, you'll see that my ebook, the Sales Focused MSP, is available there. And the password for that is MSP 2021. And that is a process playbook handbook for any MSP that would like to grow their business this year. And the slide deck will be available. The replay will also be available. Next, I don't know if you guys can see the chat panel, so I'm going to read out the question and then I'll answer it. Interesting session. What specific steps should a Canadian-based cold calling business owner take to avoid running afoul of anti-spam laws by either doing this himself or hiring an agency? Well, there aren't really spam laws for outbound cold calling. If you were going to put your business phone number on a do not call registry, clients would never be able to call you. So there is no such thing as a do not call registry for businesses in Canada, in the US, in anywhere. So if you're trying to avoid CAN spam penalties, you have to have what's called express opt-in permission to email, but you can still email people one at a time. You just can't email them in bulk. If you're working with a third-party agency and you want to know whether or not they're going to conform to the cold calling standards that are set up in the country that you want to engage in, that's a conversation you need to have with them. And if they can't give you an answer that seems feasible to you, when in doubt, talk to your lawyer. I own a cold calling company. I'm not a lawyer. Obviously we sought counsel before we bought our cold calling platform to make sure that we weren't running afoul of anything. When you're calling from Canada into another country, or when you're calling state to state now with new data privacy regulations, there are a lot of regulations around how you can store your data, but there aren't a lot of regulations around who you can and cannot call, right? People will say, take me off your list. That does not mean that they are on a do not call list. It just means they don't want to talk to you again. And I would recommend taking them off of your call list, or at least suspending calling them for a good 12-month period. The password is MSP 2021 2021. So when in doubt, if you're ever wondering about things like recording phone calls or spam compliance, it's best to talk to your lawyer. And if you're concerned that the company isn't abiding by those regulations, they are probably not a company that you should be doing business with. It's like thinking that your spouse is unfaithful. They may as well be, right? If you don't trust the agency that you've engaged to do your marketing, it's time to find another agency. Hey, Adam, can you actually see the chat panel? Like, can people see the questions that are being fed to me on this, or is it invisible? Thanks. John says, be sure to capitalize MSP if you can see that. I don't know whether you can or not. This platform has been interesting. So if you'd like to see the ebook and you're having trouble with the panel today, it's managedsalespros.com/grow your MRR. If you go to the Managed Sales Pro site, you'll find it. And then the password is MSP 2021. You can't see the chat. Oh, you know what? There's a lag. So this platform is built in such a way where it gives you about a 20-second delay between me presenting and you seeing the presentation. So I understand why that's happening. Great. So now I know that next time I can make up a bunch of questions and nobody can see that nobody's actually asked them, which is a good thing to do when you're doing webinars. If you're going to open up the floor to Q&A, you should always have some questions prepared. And that way, when nobody asks any, you can just read the fake questions out to the group. I'm just typing in. All right, so considering the fact that there is a little bit of a lag here, going to open up the floor for questions once again. And I did prepare some fake ones if you don't have any real ones. But I wanted to make sure that you couldn't see that people weren't asking them first. All right, so here's my list of fake questions. What do good calling KPIs look like? Good calling KPIs vary wildly depending on the activities that you're doing and how deep into the process you are at the time. So at the beginning of a cold calling campaign, let's say for every 100 companies you call, or every 100 companies that you buy on a list online, the first thing you're going to want to assume is that that data is at least 30 to 40% garbage. So all of the work that you're doing, 30 to 40% of it, you're just throwing away. It has to get done, but the numbers that you have at the beginning of a campaign and the numbers that you have a year into the campaign are going to be wildly different. But on average here, it takes somewhere between 200 and 300 dials on a cold list to get to a sales appointment. But once the data has all been scrubbed and verified, it's much closer to 1 in 100 dials. So out of that 100 dials you're making, at the tail end of a cold calling campaign, you should be able to schedule, you should be able to talk to about 10 decision makers. And of those 10 decision makers, 1 should be interested. Of the appointments that you schedule, so let's say for every 4 appointments you schedule, if your closing ratio on referral appointments is 1 in 2 or 1 in 3, assume that your closing ratio is going to drop by about 20 to 30%. So if you can normally close 1 out of every 2, you're going to close 1 out of every 3 or 4. And that's simply because when somebody walks you to an appointment, right, if somebody gives you that lead, this is important to remember since you're going to be doing a lot of interactions to create those referral opportunities. When somebody gives you a recommendation, you are far more inclined to do business with someone that you already like and trust based on the fact that they're already working with someone you like and trust. So 80% of the work is done when a referral walks through the door. When you're calling out cold or emailing cold, 20% of the work is done before the appointment, and 80% of it gets done after the appointment when you're still building rapport and trust with that company. So if you're used to having that aggressive, oh, you know what, you put me in front of someone and I can close them. If the only people that you've ever been put in front of and closed have been word of mouth referrals, you're going to see significantly different numbers, and you shouldn't let them discourage you. And so next question, we think of calling as cold and warm calls. We think these would be done by different people that have different understandings of our company. This is similar to your owner to owner calls. How does MS Pros fit into this? There's a couple of places that managed sales pros could fit into a structure like that. One, managed sales pros could do all the heavy lifting at the beginning of the process, eliminating the need for your callers to bang their heads against the wall, constantly talking to companies where that guy died 5 years ago and that company went out of business and this company was acquired 15 years ago. So the data available online is crap. Just accept it and understand that you're going to have to make that data not crap. So we can take on that responsibility for you and then send anything that is qualified over to your team to pick up from there. And we can also just take it through the entire process. So our usual engagements have a 4-week consult at the beginning where we develop the program and process that you want to follow. Then we have a 90-day period where we do outbound dialing just to scrub the garbage out of the list. And then we proceed to a year-long engagement telemarketing where ideally we've already gotten the junk out of the list and now all of our calls are meaningful. We'll schedule webinars and events through that calling process so that we can do that process. We'll have more junior callers make the initial calls, and then somebody who's more senior in the company would follow up with those webinar registrations so that we're sure that they get handled perfectly each time. Next question. When you say 100 dials, that's not 100 targets. That could be a 3rd, 7th, or 10th call back to the same target. Correct. So it may take up to 17 dials for you to schedule a sales appointment with a qualified decision maker, even after you've identified that they're qualified. So you're not calling 100 companies, you're making 100 calls. So one of the important things to look at when you're structuring your calling time as a business owner is, are you going to take 100 leads and call them over and over again? Are you going to take 400 leads and call them once? How do you want to structure your outbound days? I usually recommend buying a small amount of data from any source that you're looking at. So there's no value in buying 2,000 leads, even if they're cheaper, because by the time you get to call 2,000, if you're making 20 a day, that data is all stale again anyway. So buy 100 leads at a time, even if it costs a little more. And again, let's learn from our Peloton experiences. There's no point in making large investments in anything if you haven't already proven to yourself that you're going to follow that process through. So doing a little bit at a time, adding a little bit more all the time, and then you get to the point where you've created a sales process. Next question is, how much is a caller per month if we had to do it, or if we had you do it, and how many calls per month do they make, and how long is the contract? Our engagements last about 16 months. It's $6,000 a month, $6,000 a month. I wouldn't expect you to have appointments for the first 4 months. And then after that, we on average see a 200% ROI. With companies that stay for the duration of their engagements, we have a 30-day out clause in our programs. So if you're not loving it or we're not loving you, we all have the opportunity to say, we don't think this is working. What is the ratio if it's not peer-to-peer and if it's a junior cold caller? So if you mean junior cold caller, they just got on the phone yesterday, you know, that 300 dials to 1 appointment is going to be significantly closer than the 100 to 1. 100 to 1 is kind of best practices. We're following all of the right steps. We're using open-ended questions and not closed-ended questions. We're doing first point of contact lead qualification. And that simply means that even when the gatekeeper says we're not interested, you want to find out on that call whether or not they have the number of computers that you want to consider them as a managed services client in the future. So you don't, when we disposition calls, and disposition is just a fancy word for, you know, creating an outcome, we will attempt to get through that gatekeeper, and we want to ask them whether or not they're an appropriate fit for our clients so that we know we don't have to waste another 17 calls on them. So if you're going to ask that question, ask it early so that you don't waste any dials. Now, this platform is immediately going to lock all of us out the minute it turns noon Eastern time. So we've got about 2 more minutes here. Anyone has a last minute question, speak now or forever hold your peace or send me an email afterwards. If you mentioned that you were on the webinar today at hello@managedsalespros.com, they'll forward it right over to me.